I believe you will agree that companies play a fundamental role in society. They are the engine of our economies, of innovation, of job creation. And in recent decades, we have seen the business sector expanding its borders, bringing its operations, and with them their impacts to all regions and countries in the world. So as you can imagine, respect for human rights and the environment, and more concretely, the responsibility to avoid violations of human rights and to reduce any negative impact on the environment has become a fundamental factor to this fast expansion. So because of this, today, the commitment of companies to work and advance in the field of human rights and the environment is of utmost priority. So how can a company avoid negative impacts within their value chain? The most relevant mechanism to avoid negative impacts is performing a due diligence process. This process helps companies to identify their main risks, take the necessary measures to prevent and mitigate those risks, and to have the appropriate tools and methodologies to measure and communicate their progress. Now, within this progress, it is especially important that companies do not consider only impacts of their own activities in terms of human rights and the environment, but also of all activities within their value chain. In this sense, sustainable supply chain management has become a priority for large companies. Now, the first question might be, why perform a due diligence? Where is the business case? Well, the first reason to do it, and this one is obvious, you will minimize risks for your company. You will also avoid potential scandals and reputational damage. You will attract responsible investors. You will also attract and retain talent. A performed due diligence will help you reduce costs, become more knowledgeable about your value chain, create alliances with suppliers, and finally, it will help you adapt to regulations. And here we come to the regulatory aspect of it all. For quite some time, we've had different frameworks and guidances on responsible business conduct and supply chain management. So like OECD guidelines or the UN guiding principles on human rights and business. Today, we have mandatory legal requirements taking shape that actually mainstream these frameworks, standardize the due diligence process, and mandate companies to act accordingly. In general, regulations when it comes to sustainability and ESG are, as you have probably noticed, fast developing all over the world. I'm sure you have heard that there has been a lot of regulatory activity in this area in the European Union in the past several years, especially. The regulation everyone is talking about within, but also outside of EU today is Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD. Now, this directive obligates companies in scope to report on their activities in environmental, social, and governance area. So it sets a reporting obligation, not a behavior. But the intention of the EU is not to stay solely on the reporting, but to actually drive change on the market. And this cannot be accomplished by setting only reporting obligations. Behavior changes need to be implemented as well. And to that effect, today, of all days, is an important day for the EU. Later today, members of the European Parliament will vote on another important piece of legislation, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. This directive is about behavior change. It aims to foster sustainable and responsible corporate behavior throughout global supply chains. It requires companies to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for adverse impacts of their activities on human rights and the environment. CSDDD, as we call it, mandates companies to establish due diligence processes for human rights and environmental issues. So everything that I talked about at the beginning is today on vote to becoming a legal obligation for the largest companies doing business within the EU. It will mandate them to conduct due diligence processes that cover human rights, labor rights, and environmental standards across their supply chains and operations. So how do you perform a due diligence process? The first step in any due diligence process is to assess how a company's activities and the business relationships may pose risks to human rights and the environment. In doing so, companies need to consider potential or actual negative impacts throughout their value chains. This identification will vary in complexity depending on the size of the company, the risks of serious impacts on human rights and the environment, and the nature and context of the company's operations. Also, complex value chains require prioritization of those risks that need greater attention and immediate action. After identification and prioritization of negative impacts, it is important to integrate the findings into the relevant internal processes and take appropriate measures to prevent and mitigate those impacts. Examples of measures to take to mitigate the identified impacts dependent on the risks might be evaluating the workload of employees or training employees on mental health or preparing and implementing an emissions reduction plan or even carrying out an in-person audit among crucial suppliers. Next step goes into process supervision that enables companies to track the effectiveness of measures over time. It is important to note that here it is not enough to set KPIs that rely on easy-to-collect data, but companies should also focus on monitoring how actions they are taking are leading to a real positive outcome for affected groups. And this is not always easy to collect. An example of such a KPI can be the number of people, workers in the value chain, paid a living wage as a result of changes in the contract with a supplier. As the final step, companies should be transparent about the whole process. Remember, any company, regardless of size, sector, nature, or location, has the responsibility to avoid violations of human rights and negative impacts on the environment. So this, I think, should be the most important pledge a business sector can make. Thank you so much.